The Legend of Zelda is one of Nintendo's most popular franchises, and it's not hard to see why. It started with the first game, The Legend of Zelda, launching on Nintendo's Family Computer Disk System in Japan in 1986, then a year later in the rest of the world with the new Nintendo Entertainment System. At the time, it was absolutely massive and sold 6.5 million copies. That's about the population of El Salvador today. It was a top-down adventure game where the player plays as Link, or whatever name you give them, on a quest to save Hyrule, the land in which this takes place, and rescue Princess Zelda. There are different enemies to defeat, dungeons to navigate, and puzzles to solve. Over time, the franchise has evolved and eventually introduced 3D open-world gameplay with The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, which released in 1998 and was hugely influential in the gaming world. It was also one of the first games that I played and therefore has a special place in my heart. The most recent mainline game, Breath of the Wild, has sold 26.55 million copies, which is about the population of Cameroon, which is bigger in population than Australia. That's a lot of copies, and at the time of writing and recording this, we are eagerly anticipating the launch and further announcements of the sequel to The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. If you're watching this in the future, that may not have aged well, but maybe it did. It's already been 4 years since they announced it. Who knows how much longer we will wait. The Legend of Zelda has a special place in the hearts of many, so much so that people have named their children after Princess Zelda. Zelda Williams, the daughter of the late Robin Williams, is named after Princess Zelda.
I became a hero.
Dad.
I saved your kingdom.
Dad.
Yes, Zelda?
Are you mixing me up with the princess again?
Hard to say. You're both pretty magical.
That's pretty cool, but how did Princess Zelda get her name? Let's find out. Back in the development of the original Legend of Zelda, back in the 80s, they needed to come up with a solid name for the princess. Solid enough that the entire franchise would bear that name. Shigeru Miyamoto was the general manager of Nintendo Entertainment Analysis and Development Division, and was the director for many early Nintendo titles, including Donkey Kong, Super Mario Bros, and yes, The Legend of Zelda. Miyamoto revealed that Princess Zelda, and then the entire Legend of Zelda franchise, is named after a real person, that person being Zelda Fitzgerald. I don't expect that name to be familiar to everyone. It certainly wasn't for me when I found this out, but if you didn't know Zelda's name, you might know her husband's name, Francis Scott Fitzgerald, or F. Scott Fitzgerald as he is more commonly referred to as, the American novelist and author of works including The Great Gatsby. Miyamoto commented that Zelda Fitzgerald was a famous and beautiful woman from all accounts, and I liked the sound of her name, so I took the liberty of using her name for the very first Zelda title. But other than being the wife of F. Scott Fitzgerald, who was Zelda Fitzgerald? After researching this fact, I became a little shocked that I, personally, had never heard of her. She was quite a notable person during the 1920s and 30s. Zelda was born on July 24th, 1900 to Alabama Supreme Court Justice Anthony Dickinson Sayer and his wife Minnie Buckner Mackin Sayer, and she was a free-spirited individual through her childhood and raised a few eyebrows in her hometown of Montgomery due to her lack of propriety. She first met F. Scott Fitzgerald at a dance at the local country club. Scott had spent time studying at Princeton and was aspiring to be a novelist, but he paused that temporarily and was serving with the army at this point, where he was stationed in Montgomery. They fell in love very quickly, and it wasn't long before they were engaged. But Zelda wanted to marry someone with the financial stability to support her. And after Scott left the army, he went to work in an advertising firm in New York, where Zelda broke off the engagement. Furious, Scott worked hard to publish his first book, This Side of Paradise. After its success, Zelda agreed to marry, and they married quite suddenly in 1920 in an extremely private ceremony where not even their parents were in attendance. Then came an unusual and largely unhappy marriage. The Fitzgeralds' marriage is one of the most infamous in regards to how toxic it was. There was a lot of alcohol and partying, but not a lot of joy. In 1921, the couple gave birth to their only child, a daughter named Frances Scott Fitzgerald. Yes, they gave their daughter the same name as her father, which to me kind of tells me a little bit about the kind of person F. Scott Fitzgerald was. As time progressed, Zelda had mental health struggles and spent various times institutionalized, but she was able to continue to be creative, and Zelda was an extremely creative individual and would try many different things from painting to dancing to writing, and had several of her own short pieces published, sometimes under her husband's name, especially when times were tight for money, but she only published one novel herself, which is unfortunate. The novel, Save Me the Waltz, was published in 1932 after it was heavily revised. After her publishers let Scott read it, after which he became furious, partly because the book was semi-autobiographical and detailed the extremely volatile marriage that they were in, and also because of the similarities with the book that he was currently working on, which led Scott to claim that Zelda was plagiaristic and a third-rate writer, which is exactly the kind of thing you want to hear from your husband. Scott eventually died of a heart attack at the age of 44, and Zelda continued to live a quieter life, at that point spending time in and out of hospital. She tragically died in a hospital fire in 1948. Despite the tumultuous relationship Zelda had with her husband, she is considered by many to be the first flapper. Flappers were a subculture of young Western women in the 1920s who challenged societal norms and took their independence into their own hands. They did this in a number of ways, including challenging fashion norms, often wearing bobbed hair and short skirts. Knee-length skirts were considered short in the 1920s, as well as engaging in non-conformative behaviour such as drinking alcohol, smoking, and driving automobiles. It was at this time when women in different countries were being allowed to vote and were entering the workforce and going on to higher education in greater numbers than ever before. There are some people who believe that Zelda was one of the first people to embrace this lifestyle, which led to other women following along. And many consider Zelda Fitzgerald to be one of the iconic women of the 1920s and place her alongside others like Marilyn Monroe and Princess Diana. And she was the person who Princess Zelda was named after in the Legend of Zelda video games. And I think that's pretty cool. As I've said on this channel before, writing about history is hard, and I really zoomed through the biography of Zelda Fitzgerald in this video. If you're interested in learning more, please feel free to check out the link to my sources in the description. I was fascinated by the detail that the Legend of Zelda is named after a real person, and I was further intrigued in learning who Zelda Fitzgerald was and the life that she led. I think it's wonderful that these little details are all around us, and looking into them gives us a greater appreciation for people and a deeper understanding of life in the past. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love to know in the comments below, and if you haven't already done so, I invite you to subscribe to That's Pretty Cool, where I delve into all kinds of subjects that inspire a sense of curiosity and wonder in me. Thanks again for watching, take care, stay curious, and I will see you next time.